So I would just love to hear how everybody's doing. We had a couple of interesting exercises yesterday, which may have had more of an impact during your sleep or not. I don't know. I just would love to check in.
I have always had a question, and I don't know, I haven't been able to articulate it, but because I think that it's also a little bit of frustration behind that question. And when I ask it, I guess the frustration more addressed than the question. Makes sense. And the question, so not only you, but most spiritual teachers talk about high experiences, and they also talk about the dissolution of the self and the ego and all of that, but they still are speaking about that. My question is, who's speaking really? So, for example, you talk about the planes, and you talk about the dissolution of the self in this center of the toroidal, all this. But who or what is reporting that experience?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that either we don't have an appropriate language to talk about those experiences, or in a way, all this the spiritual talk is telling people, us that are not spiritual teachers, something that we want to go there to get that experience, but there's no way because we don't have that experience that a spiritual teacher has. And they talk about the solution of the self. There's no self. You hear people like Ruth Spira, all these people, they talk, there's nothing, there's nobody there. But they're there, sitting there, talking. So what is that? I mean, I would love to really have someone that sits in your position be clear about that, because I don't think anyone is being clear.
When I say my experience, I can only speak from my experience. I've been talking about these different lenses. And these lenses are a resting place of perception that have a substance that's created for a vehicle for that whole experience to happen. So there's thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. And that vehicle of humanness, right, is usually where people say I from. Their experience of their saying I is the me. And that's the me, the seeker, that's trying to figure something else out. When consciousness wakes up to that cessation point, or the arising point of existence, there's often that experience of nothing, of no self. In the trajectory here, there's just been a continual opening up to the next layer of self, the next viewpoint, the resting point of perception in a more inclusive vehicle of consciousness that has thoughts, emotions, and a body, an energetic and physical vehicle structure for this unnameable truth to rest in and as which it is and perceive through. So yesterday in the exercise where we were playing with resting with all of those lenses of perception and the mystery from which all those lenses arise, and resting with all of those collapsed together, there can be the lived experience of being and not being, or being and living the mystery. And so that I that speaks will, like, that's the mystery. No one knows where that I comes from, because consciousness only wakes up to itself in its own timing to see where that I came from before. And the I feels the same where that's why you can say there's, the self and the capital S. Self, capital S, no self, capital N and S. Because there's a recognition of that one singular self, that one singular I am that is everything. And the mystery from which even that I arises from.
My experience is that the I am, it's also fabricated, but the I is not fabricated. So there is, the moment you say I am, it's a projection. It's something that appears. That's the moment that the illusion starts at any plane, at any. So there is an individuality at every single level of, until we get to the last one, which is the individuality of the existence of everything, the I of everything. This Ramana called it the I.
And I wouldn't say it's the last one. I'd say it's just the last one that a human being has realized.
Yeah, and that's what it is.
So it's not necessarily the last one.
But we don't know that.
Right, but that feels more like truth.
Yes.
To rest in that
should
mystery.
Be more...
We'll know that it's resting in the mystery when you come, we're speaking about that arising point. Right, that cusp, that edge of existing and being with that dissolving back where there's no perception. The vehicle of perception is created.
The vehicle of perception is created, yes.
And the origin of that is the mystery.
Yes.
And so every time there's been an opening here to a next level, there's a sense of satisfaction of, oh, that's where it comes from. Right? And it just continues.
So my next question with that is that when people talk, especially teachers or something, people talk about functioning from that non-existence. To me, that is impossible, because if you really are in that state, ultimate state of the mystery, whatever ultimate state, at that point, there can be no functioning. The moment you function, you get out of that.
I don't believe that's true.
So,
well, what do I want to say? I mean, I've had some experiences with this, but not nearly as dramatic as experiences I've heard from other people, right? Wasn't it Buddha who they found with ants eating him?
No, Ramana.
That was Ramana. Okay.
Not answer.
Right, and same thing with
Rats.
Amma. She's got an entourage around her, because if she drops into samadhi, she can drown.
Exactly. That's my point. From that point, they cannot function. That's what I've been saying.
No, but I don't.
Experience
no, but that doesn't negate the other. There are experiences
what do you mean that doesn't negate the other?
That just because that can happen doesn't mean that consciousness can't function from that state. Those are just examples of where those functions start to break down. And I experience those in terms of my health, where I can tolerate really extreme things physically that actually shouldn't be. That I don't know that aren't.
I'm sure that they have their own individual experience.
But let me say one thing, say another thing, because just because that can happen, I have also had experiences of resting as that infinite mystery totality with all the holographs seen for themselves as holographs, and then experiencing this view through this lens, but as that.
Oh, yeah, I understand that part. But what I'm saying is,
And there was functioning happening.
Capacity to walk, to talk, to that from that state in that moment. That's what I'm saying. It's impossible. That's why Ramana was there and the rats were eating him, because he was in a state that is impossible to function at the human level.
Who's saying? How do you know it's impossible?
Well,
that's what I'm saying. Is you're putting a limitation. Your mind, your idea, your interpretation is putting a limitation on something you actually don't really know the answer to.
Well, but yes, that's one way to see it. The other way to see it is that I don't have any evidence that people have been functioning from that. So it's possible, but where's the evidence? Because it's easy to say anything, you're putting a limitation. I'm saying there's no evidence. I haven't seen any spiritual teacher that is from that state functioning. The moment they function, they have to come into another state.
But that evidence you're speaking from is such a limited range of evidence taking. We're talking about your life with what you've accessed.
I'm not saying that that's not the case. All I'm saying is that it is possible. I accept that it's possible, but it hasn't been manifested. I haven't seen it.
And I'm just saying that there's a limitation happening. If part of your deep desire is to live that, and that's a deep calling for you, then you might be the one that's the example of that for yourself. Letting go of the limitations of how consciousness structures itself. I mean, I see the brilliance of the soul development, right? The maturing, all of that, and there's a brilliance as consciousness hides itself from itself. It masks itself. It's miraculous how that can actually happen. And so that happening is not, I'm not saying you're saying this is a problem. I'm just saying the masking, the hiding, the falling asleep is not a problem. There's another piece I wanted to speak.
A lot of the spiritual discussions I'm hearing all around the call for clarity. I certainly would like to have clarity in language, and so I very much appreciate. So I'll just say an experience I had on a Zen retreat, I don't know, when I was 19, eons ago, but it alerted me to things beyond the mind. And what happened is I took a nap, and then at some point, I'll just say the body woke up because the person hadn't arrived. So there was an experience of suddenly vision, colors, light, texture coming, but it wasn't, there was no world and there was no person. It was just a pure perceptual experience. So like one part of the body woke up, but it's almost as if some level of mind, going back to how you were speaking yesterday, it was like some level of mind hadn't kicked in yet. You know, maybe just because doing the meditations, who knows what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was a few seconds later, the person woke up. Oh, I'm in a room. Oh, I'm in a bed. Okay, right. That's the wall. That's the ceiling. That's the wall. But it was recorded. So consciousness recorded that memory of just pure visual stimuli. The body didn't get up and move. I presume, unless there was some way, this goes to what Jose was bringing up, is, and I'd love your input on this, is at the level that that experience was happening, I can't imagine that the body could have gotten up and moved, because the body didn't have any sense of being a body in a room, in a world, of anything to do. Functioning at that realm, like the whole idea of functioning just was gone. It hadn't arrived yet. And so in that helped me to understand, oh, there are definitely layers of consciousness. So clearly there was something conscious because it registered and memory was functioning. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the I am is a layer, as it seems. Even though it's a layer, you know, we don't often slip out of. But that was how I experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. And the other thing I was going to say is sometimes it seems like sometimes I'll be in these states, like very high energy states, and I'm aware, I call it symbol land, and I'm aware that, oh, everything's just, they look like living symbols. That's how they appear to me. Mm-hmm. Like there's an idea somewhere, and that idea somehow activates and structures energy, and so it almost feels like there are levels of dreaming, right? So there might be a level of dreaming going on here that creates the game board for the little characters down here to play, right? Exactly. So that's why I could never figure out, okay, where is this symbol being created? Mm-hmm. And it seems to me like when we use the word illusion, you know, I'm just spitting this out for clarification and feedback, because these have been my own little things I've been developing. And so yeah, then back to this game board, when we say the idea of Tonita, the Tonita ego is not real, it's dreamed. It's like that's another nested reality, like even dreaming from this dream, you know, and I've dreamed this person who's from a culture that was wiped out in genocide. And it's like, okay, if I'm looking at forgiving and saying that was just a dream, it's a harmless dream, then I know everything has to be a harmless dream. If I can release that in consciousness and forgive it and say all is well, that pretty much just says everything is a harmless dream. And yes, the mystery without an I am And I think Ramana says that, right? That the I is also a dream.
I mean, that's where I was trying to get to with here of surrender the I, of that, to surrender everything. And then the living mystery is where all of what is experienced and perceived arises out of the unknowable.
And now I know why I felt so fucked up my whole life. It was because I felt these things as a child. But they were so big, I couldn't integrate them. I couldn't hold them. I didn't know what I was seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just made me just feel incredibly fucked up. You know? And just now, I'm like, okay. Because the mind, especially a child mind, I couldn't reckon with it. I couldn't hold it. But
Is it the truth that you're saying had you feel fucked up, or is it more the way you were relating? Like, because I don't think like what do I want to say? Right, the material, the stuff, the substance. And right now I'm actually speaking about different levels because of your sensitivity is both on the human level but also the soul level. Right? So the symbol land, right? Yeah. Like that, all of that, the part that's the dreaming that has the pain, right? If you let that meet the truth that you know,
I'm ready to.
Yeah.
Now, finally, and the healing helped
tremendously. And great, and still from a larger perspective, yes, that's still another dream.
Yes.
But we're the living dream.
Yes.
I mean, we're like I was saying the other day, we're God's 3D dream.
No, I get it. And what I was saying about feeling fucked up most of my life was because I could intuit these things as a child. Like, I knew that I existed separate from everything I perceived. Like, there was some innate knowing, but there wasn't sufficient trust, or I don't know what, like anchoring in that to just unfold beautifully, like maybe in Ananda, whoever, you know, like it was more this terror of, whoa, I'm like what I was sent. I couldn't reconcile it with my everyday experience, and it was so far apart that I just gave it up. I abandoned myself. I abandoned what I knew, just to try to like live, just to try to get along, because I couldn't integrate. Like, there was a sense that I existed so remote, like so deep, and just in this other place, and it seemed like this world was just like a radio station that I could tune in, and I could tune in other places if I wanted. But I was always here in a wordless, that's how it felt.
Yeah.
But I couldn't cope with it. And now I'm like, oh my God. That's why the urgency to understand has been so important.
Right, and the same way, right, a dream can just dissolve and it's just no longer present. That can happen here too.
This world could dissolve easily.
Well, no, I'm saying your whole relationship to the world, with the pain of it, and the frustration and the anger and the hurt and all that, all of that stuff, right? That can meet the truth of you, and that whole aspect of the personality can fall away.
Yes. It feels time. Like, I had been trying to release that tension, whatever cried. It's not done. I can feel it's not done, but that was like, it felt like a huge linchpin. Just it's like, oh, I can feel myself again. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and part of that whole layering of that, like the I mean, I understand it, right? When we have experiences where it feels like something is coming at us. And so then the experience is that that's the problem. And so blame happens. But the underneath piece of saying a recognition that you abandoned yourself, right? That's the tender pain underneath. But that's where the power is.
Yes.
Of like, oh, well, what happens if I don't abandon myself?
Yes. As the mystery.
And then you see that you never abandoned yourself actually, ever. That you've always been.
The mystery.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't know that was okay. I kept thinking
Mm-hmm.
I was supposed to find something
Mm-hmm.
and understand something.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so I just wanted to share that experience to present it as, just like how I came to see, oh yeah, that I am. That's also a story.
Mm-hmm.
That's another construct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
So I don't know if that helps the question anyway.
Well, it doesn't matter. It helps. It helps right here, right, with this beautiful heart that's infinitely radiant and generous and kind and sweet, and that has been experiencing being trodden upon.
Trauma.
Yeah.
Like this life, being born is like a trauma.
Yeah. And that whole
that
thing
I'm just
can
waking
then,
up out of.
Right, and the whole thing can then just change.
The knowing, oh, even that can go, and I still exist. You know, like me, not me as a Tonita, but that, you know, everything is still being held, like these things we can't imagine life being without them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a layer.
Right, and what I'm getting from what you're saying is that as that sense of, because each body, each vehicle of consciousness has an innate and appropriate sense of integrity, that it's supposed to sort of hold itself together in a way.
Yes.
Right, the physical body, you want your skin to hold everything in. Right? And psychologically, you want to know the difference between your thoughts and someone else's, and emotionally, to know the difference between your emotions and someone else's, right? There's a health there. And then as one starts to open through the oneness, you can start to feel other people's feelings and other people's thoughts, and a whole new level of integrity needs to come forward. And this, for me, feels like is another aspect of the evolution of a soul. And it makes sense if its one singular existence is busting itself out in all this individuation to master or part of the gift of that individuated experience is this mastery on all these levels of living that paradox of being one singular truth and an individuated expression.
Yes.
And so you start seeing the individuation and oneness on all of these levels. And it happens through the personal experience, and it also happens through the plane and through all these layers. So when we say grief, everyone can have their own grief experience, but we all recognize grief as one singular consciousness.
Frequency, yeah.
So, which is also consciousness. It's I am just as everything else is. So when you start getting into all the stratosphere of everything, it's just, right, it's just infinite. But this place where you're opening and recognizing, okay, this certain sense of self can actually let go, and it discovers it's still held.
Yes.
So you're opening to the next level of integrity, of that next frequency of being.
And since we're using the word integrity, I just wanted to say, it occurred to me the other day how helpful the way you teach is compared to other, in that all these layers, it really gives strong helps with the integration, right? Like with one teacher, you're just focusing on maybe certain states in consciousness, but here it's like the embodiment, the psychological, like everything is just, and if you just feel like it's so, so critical, is that help with the integration on all these layers and aspects. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I want to just speak a little about that sense of I and confidence and humility. So, this question of who's speaking, this I. And so when there's a resting in the ground of that I and resting in the ground of the mystery in which that I arises from, there's a place that can speak from confidence or speak from authority and clarity, but also recognizes simultaneously it's open to being wrong or having misunderstood. And so that's when you have that sense of both the truth and the mystery simultaneously. So the I that speaks is the same I that speaks anywhere, but resting through the levels of realization that are present here, there's resting in that simultaneousness. And there's no sense of doing, there's just a being. And there's no sense of it's just consciousness playing with itself. So there's no more authority here than there is there, or there, or there. So I just wanted to add that little bit, right, for that piece of the I of who is speaking. And then I say, I don't know. Right? There's a resting where there's a level of realization, but the mystery is also. There's a mystery that's speaking through its vehicles of creation and perception. So that was an intense start. Okay. But good. Yeah.
I don't mean to be dense, but we're talking about the great I in the sky as God and the individuated I, or both or all, or
That it's one I.
that it's this, and these are particles of the same I. Energetic.
So I'm going to ask a question. Is part of your question around just the nature of I, or is it also your question about the particle stuff? Because I can answer both or one.
We're going to do both then.
The experience here is that there's a continual integration through the God self perception. So the chakras in that God self are coming online. And there's been enough integration. I'm sure it's different for everybody. So if I just speak directly about my experience here, right? That in that opening through that God self level, there was more access to God. And they're just the words that make sense. I'm not saying God in terms of a religious anything. It's just the only word I had access to that made sense because I could feel the beingness of this consciousness. The same way there's a beingness of this God self. And in this God self, there's a memory of co-creating this world, in this reality on a much larger scale than where the soul creates and the human life creates. So the glimpses, and in that deeper connecting with God, there are glimpses of God's perspective. The I am has not woken up here to the I of God. I don't know if that will happen, if it's relevant in this life, or doesn't matter. It's like I'm just in the unfolding. But in the contact, that is exponentially, you know how I was saying each thing, like 1 + 1 isn't 2, it's 10,000, and then that's like 1,000,000,000. And so the exponential leap from that God self to God is beyond the scope that the sense of God self awakening here is ready for. So my experiences in relation to God are few, but the contacts start to fill out the picture. And so when I say this is God's 3D dream, that was a direct experience of opening just a fraction towards God's mind, and seeing that the universe, all those universes and universities I saw, were like different dreams arising out of God's mind. And then and that the God self is created out of God with an individuated lens to then create souls and create lifetimes. Like everything is generated out. So in that God level, that single I am, is from that view everything from that scope. So the same way you in your humanness have your life, you are quote unquote responsible, you get to have the experience, the jurisdiction over a lifetime. Do you want to play sports? Do you want to play the flute? Do you want to, and there's also a deeper orchestration of, well, you're probably going to learn how to play piano and be a concert pianist, because that's sort of what this track is. So there's this mix of this creative play and a deeper set organization because of the soul's lesson plan. Because of the God self's exploration through the soul lesson plan through the lifetime. Because of God's divine, and that I can't speak from, I haven't seen the reasons of God's expression, right? I'm only speaking to the parts that I've seen. But in that connection, there is an awareness of substance. And this is the stuff that's coming through in my writing, where I haven't been writing for a few months because of stuff that's been going on. But in the writing, what comes out is the recognition, like of God's song, right? The singing, the frequencies, the love emanating, the light, the sound, the singing are the fabric. It weaves the fabric of the substance that we are. So we're the living love, the living light, the living dream, the living song of this deeper truth that we all are. And we get to have this individuated experience. And yet we're all just one weaving. So when I was speaking in the beginning about the humanness and it looks like our bodies are separate. Well, you're breathing air, you're drinking water, you're eating food. So it's not actually separate. And then when you start going down on this more molecular level or the atomic level and are seeing everything on that scope. And so as God, that fabric body, and again, I can't say as God because I haven't realized from that perspective. From the God self perspective, I experience my body as this universe and all the particles as my body. So God's perspective is going to be exponentially larger than that and exponentially more inclusive of that if everything continues as it so far has consistently continued through all these layers. So your question of the eye of God is the eye of you, which is the eye of this and the crystal and the rug. It is one eye. So when you have this feeling of me, of Nancy, and waking up starts happening on these other levels, that's one of the first mind-blowing mysteries is discovering, oh my God, it's the same I. It's the same I. Or the same I am, however you want to use the language.
Yeah, it's mostly the language I was trying to fit in his concept of I, but yeah, that's great. I like that.
So then, yes, one opens to that, and then the mystery is that opening deeper behind everything that you experience and perceive, surrendering to the mystery from which that arises from.
I just wanted to share two dreams I had early this morning. The first one, I was in the middle of satsang with a very young woman and a big group of people. And she was sitting right next to a guy, and then she started disappearing, appearing, disappearing, and appearing. And I started to freak out. And nobody else was having that experience, so I freaked out even more. Fearful experience of going beyond, because things like that could happen. So a lady had to hold me. I got really drunk so a lady had to hold me. I got really drunk of a fearful bliss. That's what it felt like. I could barely talk. I could barely walk. And the overall, it was not a nightmare, but there was that sense that, hey, that's what's going on. If you go beyond where you are right now, look what can happen. You can just go crazy. So it was disturbing, but it was not disturbing. It was very exciting. In the sense, it was just a funny dream. It was not a nightmare. But that was the message. And then after that dream was gone. And then all of a sudden, I was just free flying everywhere in a human body. I could cross windows, walls. It was just absolutely amazing. Then your Alice in the Wonderland theme came. It was a Christmas tree that started to dance. So it was just beautiful. Especially crossing the windows and the walls. It was amazing. So that was very nice. And then meditating this morning, for a split second I saw a blue toroidal field for the first time. So that was very nice too. And then I would like, I don't know if today is the timing or maybe when we break silence or not, but if your mom is open to it, I would love to ask both of you permission to ask you some questions about her experience with such a being like yourself. So if you're both open to it, either today or right now or later on, I would love to do that. So it's a kind of a double question there.
You can see how things go.
Okay.
If it's in keeping with the retreat, you could ask questions here, you know?
Okay. For me, it is in the sense that even though I'm past that, I feel I'm past that. You know, whatever my parents see me, however they see me, it's important. So that's why it would be important for me to know from to know how she experienced you in your process. So in that way, for me, it's important. But it's up to you.
Yeah. We'll see how things go.
Okay.
That transparency, or that fluidity of consciousness through all the layers of itself, for me, shows up in the way that I teach and the healing and, all of that. That's how that's showing up, and it's beginning to show up in different ways physically. And in dream state, that's one reflection of when you can dream and you're dreaming and flying through all the structures that normally in a dream would create a boundary, that a certain level of freedom is then recognized, where you're functioning in that fluidity of consciousness, right? So you can go through the roof, the wall, the ceiling, whatever, right? And it's, very fun. But so I just, in terms of the reflection of that, right, having those two dreams paired, when you're more comfortable, when one is more comfortable with not existing, when one is more comfortable with letting go of that structure of self, that's when all that fluidity can start to really open. And then all these different cities and different things start coming forward because one's recognizing themselves in a larger totality that's functioning from a different set of rules. So I just wanted to speak to that.
So I'm in Enrique's first dream. Just the experience of, I don't think you used the word terror, but seeing that person open and close and open and close, and like, oh my God, and so I have, I'm in deep terror, and it, yesterday's meditation was really, really helpful with it. I ended up back in the womb, in my mom's womb, and so there was a lot of terror there, and the whole experience yesterday was I kept going into an experience, and then I would come out of it and just be resting in. I was aware the whole time, but I was resting in black, and then I would go into another experience and come out and rest in black, and it was very calming. And so, and then so it's really hard for me to talk about it, but all of this terror has come up, and I feel like a lot of it has started to integrate. And so this morning, I was present with some of my body inside, and I was just saying, I'm here, and like I felt like I was starting to come back into my body, and the first night that I was here, I saw this zip line in my dream. I saw a vertebrae and then a zip line. And my experience the whole time that I'm here has been, I am on this zip line of like, okay, now that happened. That person just talked about it. And, that's my experience. Okay, now I got to let that go. Now the next thing happened. Okay, that person just talked about, okay, now I got to let that go. And I feel like I in a nutshell, I am very aware that I dissociate a lot and I abandon myself a lot. Mm-hmm. And often I think I do that in order to be with the people that I'm around. To kind of suppress what my world and my life would be like to shut it down, so that I can relate to my wife and my friends, and so here I'm on this zip line, and I'm scared to death. Because if I really let it happen, I'm already on my way to nothing. Like I let go of my home, my job. When I go back, my wife and I are probably going to separate, and I will have nothing in the material world. And that doesn't scare me so much. It scares me a little, but not that much. But I'm terrified of continuing to be really, really alone. And if I really let myself be who I am and continue to open in ways that I have shut down, I think. I'm just scared. And I don't know, that's all. I can't articulate it. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, first I just want to acknowledge that fear and that all of that, right? And all of that was also part of my own experience. And for me, the fear of being alone ended up having different storylines from different lifetimes of experience. So it was actually another just level of conditioning. So even though it might look like that on the outside, because as consciousness shifts, sometimes the circle of friends and relationships shift. But all consciousness is doing is meeting itself. And so it meets itself in a new way. Does that help?
You're saying there's nothing to fear. Which I know. And I actually experience it sometimes. Mm-hmm. But maybe that's not what you're saying. Maybe you're saying something much deeper than that.
Well, I don't know if it's much deeper. I mean, I'm just aware that was my fear and my experience. That every time I went deeper, I made less sense to more people.
Exactly.
And
who do you have to talk to? You just talk to yourself all the time, that's it?
Well, she's here.
So there are some people in the world. But we're willing to listen. So there was this seeming truth
on the outside validating the inner experience. But that's how all of our fears work. We have some inner fear, and it seems to be validated in our outer experience. And so when I came to this one, I assumed this one was true for some reason.
What do you mean this one?
This one, that the being alone, continuing on this path, because it just kept seeing how that was happening. Yeah. And I had fewer and fewer friends, and I mean, life was just getting super small. Yeah. But at some point there was a seeing through that storyline of, oh, haha, that thought comes from, a zillion experiences in this lifetime, but the deeper root was from other lifetimes. Sure. So, and getting to that deeper root, then it changes one's perception and changes the experience. So I'm just saying that of, don't believe that one either. I mean, that's the...
Now, with just like this zip line, it's like the experience are going to go so fast. It's like you can't. It's like just don't even eat. Like why you can't? It's like I'm not going to have steak anymore. I'm not going to savor it. It's just going to. Like I might as well just put an IV so I have nourishment that way, because I can't. If it goes that fast, it's like.
So I have some questions for you. What do you mean when you're talking about the zip line and what's going so fast?
Well, like you just said, thank you. That's just a storyline, and let go. That too will be let go of. But then every storyline is going to be let go of.
Yes.
And. Well, and then you just, I mean, ultimately, I'm following that trail and ending at nothing.
Well, it seems like nothing, but then you discover what's there.
So then what this line of what I'm talking about is just another way of coming into nothing, and then there's something.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the movement towards nothing, this is where that exercise came from yesterday, that movement towards nothing can be terrifying. On each of these different game boards, the fabricated timeline is different. So the soul timeline for working something out is much longer than one human lifetime. And the God Self lifetime for exploration is much longer. So in terms of memory of different universes, 14 universes ago that have all like come and gone, right? It's a different fabric of timeline creation. So that your zip line and things just going so fast. And then all of those, well, in the felt sense, your human felt sense, when, there's an experience that most people have of having a hurt or a feeling or something come up in this moment and then disappear, right? It's like feels just and I would say in contrast to when you have a feeling that feels endless or infinite or bottomless, or it's never gonna go away because the quality is this huge, vast thing, right? That's one is then tapping into that feeling sense in one of those other dimensional bodies that has a different time frame. And so the human perspective can feel overwhelmed by the infinite perspective because its lifespan is fairly short. But because it's all one holographic shebang, when we fully meet anything, any experience, completely in the everything and the nothing, it resolves itself, it completes itself, reveals the polishing, gem polishing aspect of its nature, and returns back into nothing. So in the zip line thing, yes, there's experiences, and some things want to go fast and some things want to be enjoyed longer or have a longer time span. So it still can then open you into the spaciousness of all that is. Enjoy your life. Enjoy what comes and goes quickly. Enjoy what sustains. And not be afraid of the appearing and the disappearing, because that's all anything is doing anyway. And if I bring that back to the discussion this morning about the I, and living that fabric of the appearing and the disappearing I, the living that simultaneousness, the experience of, So it makes sense that terror, and it's also no different than anything else.
Just never experienced anything go so fast. So, but I think I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. In the very beginning, in my initial awakening, my guides asked me if I wanted the fast track or if I wanted the gentle one. You know? And the fear that was still in my system was like, oh, let's do the gentle. let's do the gentle one. You know? Who knows what would have happened had the response been like, all right, let's do the zip line. I don't know.
I feel like I've asked for, like, inside, I'm always saying, give it to me fast, and then on another level, I'm saying, no, slow. And being here, I feel like I'm actually saying, okay, no, we're just going to do it fast, and I'm scared to death.
Right, and you can resolve the fear or not resolve the fear, and just go anyway. All right, I'm terrified. Get on the roller coaster. Okay. Ah! See what happens.
Sounds fun.
And the fear resolves too, because the fear is still also just a conditioned response. You know, if you've been locked in a closet your whole life, and suddenly the door's open, it's kind of bright out there. You know? Oh my God, the sun's gonna hurt my skin, you know? Like that. So it's just what the conditioning, that familiarity, but in actuality, in the opening, it feels exponentially better.
Well, maybe I'll experience that at some point.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The first words that come are thank you. And the first feelings that come is like tears. Fuck, I thought I was finished with that. Anyway. I have two things that are kind of related. The first is, what was that state we were trying to get into yesterday? It's like the name's gone. So whatever state that was we were doing.
I thought you said steak.
Nothing.
I'm like,
Oh,
what's steak?
the state of nothing. This big deal, nothing. So, bam, and I just went clunk, heavy, relaxed, whatever, which kind of struck me as just a little bit like, however, that's where I was, and great sleep. But when I woke up, I remembered back when I used to meditate. Almost 20 years ago was my meditation period. And, I hear Peter's talk about and the mind and the silence and the awareness and so on, which is what they were talking about back then. And my opinion was I was a pretty crappy meditator. And I didn't, there was no pride to be had in any performance. And so sometimes when I was sitting there, it was this odd thing of like, I'd be sitting there, I'd be pretty quiet. And then I'd come back. I said, ooh, must have fallen asleep. And I didn't really think anything of it. Nobody was talking about it at all. And it was really, I felt very refreshed coming back. And this happened a few times, and I didn't really ever say anything. Nobody was talking about it. I didn't attach, well, I just fell asleep. You see, I didn't know what I was doing. But when I think about it, I say, the only way I knew that it happened, I didn't know going in, and the only way I knew that it happened was that I woke up, in my language. And so I said, well, that makes sense, because when you talk about it, or when you talk about the things that are coming into and out of nothing at the same time, it's like I kind of know that. So when I say I kind of know that, I can feel that. I don't know what you're talking about. I can't really understand you, but I can feel what is truth of what you're saying. And so I say, oh, I think that happened back then. You didn't know what it was. Nobody knew. No significance to it. It just was that way, and kind of makes sense. Was it or wasn't it? I'm certainly not going to bring it to you and say, did I do it, Kristin? I mean, it's like, who gives a shit? But it makes sense to me, and it just other things fit in with that. And that brings me to the other thing is I'm not bringing it to you as like, did I? Or or whatever. Who knows? And it's 20 years ago, so who gives a shit? I mean, I've learned from listening to, the person I've chosen as teacher. I've learned, to my chagrin, that sometimes she's quote unquote wrong. And so, and when I say wrong, I don't actually, my example of wrong is when I said the other day, I said exposed, and I said, oh, I feel so exposed. That that word exposed, that captured for me at that time, only, this is not the truth of any kind, it's just that at that point, that caught my feeling. And Kristin said, vulnerable, and I'm kind of like, when I'm like that, I'm kind of a little bit like, oh, yeah. And I heard vulnerable, and I said, okay, keep it. But I could feel there was no connection. But I said, okay, and I tried to remember. But how graphic do I get? But it was really this morning when I was sitting on the toilet in there, and I said, yeah, you really are bathroom phobic. And then the same thing came. I just feel so exposed. And when I said that, to myself, I said, oh, you see, so exposed carries the weight of truth here. And when I actually say it to you, you can hear the truth of it. My truth. This is not the truth. This is just, you can hear my truth. And so I would be losing my truth, in effect, if I say, oh, vulnerable, because that's not true for me. It's true in a dictionary sense, and it may be useful for describing to people, but when I'm actually describing it to you, I would not use vulnerable, because it just doesn't ring. And so I keep coming back to yes, God, Kristin was the first person that gave me permission to be my, what I say, idiotic self. And I know that I'm odd and hard to understand, but she gave me permission. God, I'm not, anyway, I'm not leaving her. Holy shit, nobody else gives me permission. Anyway, but that does not mean that I should listen to everything she says, because half of it I can't understand anyway. And also it actually doesn't matter, because I do get the things that I need. Sometimes a word will come and reverberate, but I can feel it in my body. I can feel it. So it doesn't really matter. In fact, I think you're better off not really listening to her too much. I do, because when you start listening to the words, you parse them up. You start parsing them to pieces and everything, and you lose the I don't have a word for it. It's like the guts of it or whatever. And so I really wanted to say, I mean, it's like, boy, my lesson is listen to my truth. She's the first person that really kind of gave me permission to listen to my truth, not hers, mine. And if it fits, I say, oh, neat. And if it doesn't, I say, okay, well, not this time.
Thank you.
Oh. Thank you. Hardly describes the feeling. As you can feel.
It's just been a total delight being with you over these.
It's so hard for me to really believe that, but yeah.
Well, I've said this before. You couldn't really complete a sentence in the beginning, right? And right, so it's like seeing this evolution. It's been priceless.
Well, I know that. I also can feel the greater clarity of my light, which is like, priceless. It's like, even though I often present like kind of bumbling, whatever, all that, inside there's no bumbling. It's all really clear. It doesn't come out very clear. I understand. That's very clear. But inside it's very clear and known and solid, even though it looks. And so I can imagine I was a bit of a challenge. But what fun to have a challenge. Fortunately, that's what Kristin.
I've said this before to you, but to share it again, I remember in the beginning I would actually try to understand your words and realize that, not only could I not understand what you were saying, no one else could understand what you were saying. And so it wasn't like I could turn to someone else and say, what does he mean? But what was so beautiful was then I just started hearing your words as poetry and then reading the deeper question underneath from you. And so then that was my way of being with you, was listening to the poetry, enjoying the poetry, knowing it, well, kind of, I guess, how you are with me. Words I say don't make any sense. Right? So it was the same with you, right? But I was hearing your words as poetry, right? And then listening deeply to what's the question underneath, and then responding to that. And then I found I could actually understand the words that were strung together that weren't sentences.
I can hear you talk to other people, and I can see that there's communication, even though.
He could hear that there was communication.
I mean, I can hear you talking to others and see. About half the time I can track it. But somebody else described my words as paintings. And each one's a painting, and so it's an interpretation. And most people talk as if the word had a meaning. And yeah, kind of.
Does anyone else have a...
Can I just say, now I don't feel so bad. Thank you, Richard. That's all I wanted to say. I don't need to say anymore.
So glad we're all just giving each other permission to be.
That was beautiful and very, very articulate. Really. I also want to say thank you and to tell you that I don't know if it had to do with the exercise yesterday and throwing things into the incinerator, but I at one point yesterday asked what was in the way of my more fully blossoming. And the word that came up was pride. And I've run up against this many times where I've felt that I have had a kind of intense willfulness about this process. And my will has failed so many times. And I keep thinking, how could the answer still be pride when I have failed so many times? Where I've felt like I've tried everything. The will has tried everything, like banging on doors, trying every window. And it's like an Energizer bunny. It just like, 6 months later, a year later, it's back. It's going to do it. And even though I know that's ridiculous. But there was a different way that I approached it during this retreat. And the sequence was very deeply felt, though I'm just going to give you the synopsis because it would be too long, is I surrendered through the pride, and what was deeper than pride was shame. And then surrendered through the shame, and what was deeper than shame was a kind of fear of abandonment that I did experience in my youth. And then what was deeper than the fear of abandonment was not just separation from people and loved ones, but separation from God. And then what was deeper than separation from God was this field of oneness. And that what was deeper than the field of oneness was just complete mystery. And I woke up and I could really feel the mystery of being here. And I took a little walk, and just the mystery of this beautiful cactus, and the mystery of all of you and us sitting in this room, and the mystery of everything. And then I finished my walk. I went up those stairs that go to the top of that little mountain, which I appreciate being told where that was because I really liked going up there. And I had a kind of dialogue with my higher self. And there was something so incredibly relieving, too, about it. Felt like more deeply laying down the whole enlightenment game. A sense of, and I just love the way you've always talked about the game board, because I could feel almost like the dropping of all of that urgency because of this sense of it being all connected, and that that there if we want to even use the word enlightened, which I don't really even like, but there are aspects of me already enlightened. It's just all happening, a mysterious happening, and that I can let go of the reins. That whole thing that went back up to pride, it just sort of, it really did just go, whew. And when I got, it was completely cloudy when I was going through this sort of kind of silent meditation up there. And then when I finished, like the sun, I mean, it was quite nice. The sun just broke through the clouds, and I was like, whoa, I like this. And I don't know, I feel like what was different, because I've been through that cycle of surrender before, but I felt that part of what was different was really bringing tremendous heart and compassion to the layers of like not seeing pride and shame, which I think that's the state of most of humanity. They're bouncing between the two because of everything that's underneath that. And I just felt a lot of compassion for why those things were in place, but also a sort of letting go of the story, like it doesn't feel important to me, or, why those things were in place. It just sort of feels like it's something is not needing to hang on to that. So.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
I don't know if there's why I have to make this into anything wrong, but there's a way that I go into my experience so deeply, and I'm weaving this, this fabric of, and then I think there's something about the way I do that I leave nothing to say. And I wonder about that, like, have I somehow purposely done that so there's nothing left to say, or because I do it a lot. Like, maybe I don't present things until I've sort of worked it out for myself. Maybe it's that.
Your sharing was beautiful and stands alone. It's just
In graduate school, there were these case presentations where you'd be working with the client and you'd have to present it to the group. And then there's the main thing is about it being a discussion. And I would be, I'd work and I'd have woven everything together and to present and do this presentation. And then I would stop and everybody's like, just, oh, I guess there's nothing left to say. And that wasn't good at all. That it was, and I started to realize something about that there's a part of me that maybe doesn't like the loose threads. And then I started, for the sake of this discussion back in graduate school, of making sure that I left lots of loose threads. And I don't know about this, and I wonder about that, and then everything went so much better. and I feel like I did do a composed story today, and it's going to fray, and that's fine. I recognize it's going to fray, and then there'll be a thread, and then I'll grab hold of that thread, and then I'll have to figure out where that came from. But it is just recognizing, I think, that I like to do my own weaving, maybe. I don't know.
I have something to say now.
Okay.
It seems to me that consciousness loves to explore itself. And you can rest in that completeness. Right? And then it's like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I missed something, or maybe I should do it this, or right? So I would invite just playing an experiment for you of not needing to create another thing to look at. What happens if you rest in that completeness?
That would feel really nice.
So there's nothing to fix. The mystery just keeps unfolding.
Yeah.
Were you about to say something?
I don't need to say anything, but yeah, that hit home. Yeah.
Yeah, just rest there.
Yeah.
So this feels like a beautiful ending for our morning. So I want to thank you for your gorgeous, complete story, right? Of tracking one layer back and back and back and back and back, and then just coming to that resting. And then the beauty of the sun emerging in perfect orchestration. That's the mystery, right?